A man scraped off numbers on a check with a razor blade. Then used a pen to correct them. And then carefully stamped a fake signature. In this way a forged check was made. Although the check was perfectly forged, he looked so poor that the bank clerk rejected him. Fortunately he was only a child, so he was spared from jail. Frank was extremely disappointed and walked in embarrassment. But soon a group of pilots attracted his attention. These pilots were tall and handsome. And there were a large number of flight attendants. When they entered the hotel they were welcomed by the manager. And even children came to ask for their autographs. Frank decided to disguise himself as a pilot. He first went to an airline and pretended to be a reporter to interview the airline. He then pretended to be an employee of the airline and called the company, using the excuse that his uniform was lost, to successfully obtain the address of the factory that made uniforms. However, he was in trouble when checking out because the factory only accepted cash. Fortunately, an old man reminded him that if he revealed the pilot's work number, the airline would reimburse him. Then Frank quickly won people's favor with his handsome uniform. He went to the bank again to cash the forged check. This time he received different treatment. The bank manager personally welcomed him and he cashed a large amount. In this way Frank stayed in a luxury hotel and immersed a flight model in water. He carefully removed the logo and pasted it on the forged check. Then pressed it with a book. With the reputation of the airline he successfully cashed money. Who would have thought that the liar had just turned 18? He soon became the most notorious liar in American history. He easily defrauded $4 million and traveled to 26 countries. He pretended to be a pilot and flew 2 million miles for free. With his excellent fraudulent skills, he was invited by FBI to become an FBI researcher even after released from prison. What kind of living environment led a genius criminal? Frank was originally born and rich. His father was a successful entrepreneur and his role model. The family of 3 lived happily and harmoniously. Until one day his father went bankrupt due to business failure. The family's property was confiscated, including their house. The family had to move into a small apartment. Frank was forced to transfer out of aristocratic school. From then on his life changed dramatically. Frank kept his dressing habit, wearing a suit. On the first day of the new school he was bullied. The school bully ridiculed him for dressing old-fashioned like Teacher Dyke. This triggered Frank's bold idea. He walked to the podium and wrote his name. After this the whole class was skeptical. Frank was not stage frightened and immediately shouted, "Take your seat." Now the young and ignorant students believed it and cooperated. To establish his authority he asked the bully to read the text aloud to the students. Until the real teacher, an old lady with clumsy hands and feet, appeared. Frank was still as steady as professional. The real substitute teacher was sent away by him in a few words. Soon the matter was exposed half a month later. During this period Frank not only assigned homework to the students, but also promised at the parent-teacher meeting if the students wanted a job after graduation, they could go to his factory. Faced with such a naughty and capable son, the father did not say much, but just smiled knowingly at his son. Although life was not satisfactory, Frank's life was still acceptable. However, with the appearance of a strange man his life changed drastically again. This man caused his parents to divorce. The lawyer asked Frank to choose between his father and mother. But the 16-year-old boy faced his parents' indifference and felt desperate. He didn't choose anyone and ran away from home. When he came to train station he couldn't afford a ticket and was kicked out. He had no choice but to use an expired check. Because he looked poor he was rejected by the bank staffer. But he didn't give up and pretended to be a pilot. The result was unexpected. He not only exchanged a large amount of cash with the forged check, but also flew 2 million miles for free as a pilot and traveled to 26 countries. After tasting sweetness he forged more expired checks to make a living. With his strong social skills he spotted a sleepy female teller when cashing checks. With her introduction Frank learned about the existence of a check printer. He realized that with this his forged checks could be extremely beautiful. From an auction he bought a printer from a bankrupt bank. However, due to his crazy behavior he caught the attention of FBI. Sheriff Carl found where the last check was cashed and traced Frank's room number. However, when he arrived he found that the room was empty. At this time he found movement in the bathroom. He shouted to the people inside to come out. After Frank came out, he was unusually calm. He lied that he was a CIA agent and looked professional. Analyzing the situation at the scene, he even handed his wallet to Carl, saying that it contained his ID, and pointed to two men downstairs and said the suspect had been escorted out by his colleague. Carl believed his superb acting skills, and Frank took the opportunity to get away. Just when Carl was relieved, he opened his wallet for some reason. Unexpectedly, it was full of small cards. This made Carl faint because such a wanted criminal left under his nose. After this incident, Frank was full of confidence. He pretended to be a reporter and came to the airline again. He learned that after retirement, pilots could receive a large pension every month. With this long-term benefit, Frank felt free and easy. Not only did he imagine himself as James Bond, but also he called Carl to provoke him on Christmas, claiming that he was staying in room 3113 of a hotel. Carl, who had been cheated, naturally did not believe his lie. He began to mock Frank for making this call, saying that he could not find anyone he trusted to talk to. Unexpectedly, this hit Frank's sore spot. He decisively hung up the phone and left room 3113. Carl learned from the waiter that the name Frank made up was a name of Flash in comics. It seems that this fraud genius is still just a child. Following this clue, he found Frank's home. By comparing the photos of graduation handbook, Carl quickly locked Frank. At this time, Frank was tired of the life of a pilot and came to the hospital. He met a poor little nurse, then had an idea. He lied that he was an attending physician who came to apply for a job. With his superb skills, he soon presented a Harvard Medical School diploma to the dean. Seeing he was a top student of Harvard with 6 years of medical experience, Frank successfully became the attending physician. He sweet-talked the little nurse, whose father was a prosecutor. The young nurse was immediately deceived by his appearance and lies. In the end, Frank successfully won her heart. On the night of the engagement, FBI unexpectedly came to the door. The alert Frank sensed the danger and took out a box of banknotes to escape. His girlfriend was very surprised. Before she figured out what happened, Frank was ready to jump out of window and run away. Before leaving, he told his girlfriend that they would meet at the airport. When Carl found this place, Frank was already gone. Next day, his girlfriend came to the airport, but Frank did not show up. It turned out that he had been lying in ambush in a car and secretly observing the surroundings. At the airport, FBI had already set up a dragnet. When his face was exposed, it was almost impossible to escape. However, Frank was the smartest liar in the United States. He suddenly had an idea and called a local aviation university. Frank put on pilot's uniform and asked for 8 girls as stewardesses in the name of Pan American. After careful selection of these 8 stewardesses, Frank swaggered into the airport. When the police saw these things, their attention was instantly attracted to the girls. Frank followed closely behind them. At the same time, FBI caught a suspect around the airport. When Carl rushed over, he found that the suspect was hired by Frank to pretend to attract the attention of FBI. This was obviously successful. At this time, Frank had successfully boarded the outbound plane and escaped. 7 months later, Carl finally found Frank's trace again. His forged checks appeared in many European countries. According to the final address of the checks, Carl came to France and finally found Frank in an abandoned factory. However, the day happened to be Christmas. This time Carl came prepared. He told Frank there were 50 French police outside. As long as he walked out of this door, he would be shot to death by them. Unless Frank put on handcuffs himself, his life was at stake. Frank finally chose to believe. He obediently let Carl handcuff him. But when he walked out of the door, there was no one outside. Frank smiled. Even the master liar would be deceived one day. So Frank was extradited back to the United States by Carl. However, on the plane back home, he actually dismantled the toilet and escaped to the landing gear and escaped again. But this time he was not trying to deceive people but to find an answer. It turned out that on the plane Carl brought Frank bad news. His father had passed away. Frank knew that he was deeply sinful. He only wanted to see his parents before he died. However, when he arrived at his mother's new home, he was greeted by a little girl who looked very much like his mother. Frank realized that he was no longer necessary at home. At this moment, Frank no longer had any attachment to this world. Finally Carl found him. This time Frank no longer resisted and got into the police car obediently. At the end of the story Frank decided to start a new life. He behaved well in prison and was paroled in advance. At Carl's invitation he became a researcher at FBI. He not only helped FBI solve many check forgery cases, but also designed a variety of encrypted checks. Because of their extremely professional security, the checks he designed are still used by many large banks. But Frank is also known as the greatest fraud artist of the 20th century.